I ain't serving your kind. The hostess spat the words, not bothering to lower her voice. Zara felt rage bloom, hot and sudden, but Yolanda squeezed her arm. Black girls with temper, an easy stereotype. They knew the drill. Inside, though, Zara simmered. This wasn't about a late lunch. This was about erasing them. But here's the thing those smug faces didn't know. Their father wasn't just some rich guy. He owned this whole damn airline. And he was about to find out exactly how his company treated his daughters. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Someone's about to learn a hard lesson. Soon. Zara and Yolanda Whitmore stood clutching their charter confirmation documents, their Wellington Academy uniforms marking them as students from one of Florida's most prestigious preparatory schools. The other clients waiting in the luxury lounge exchanged knowing glances and smirks. Another case of entitled teenagers trying to game the system, thinking they could talk their way into private jets they clearly couldn't afford. But then something extraordinary happened. The uncertainty in Zara's voice disappeared. Her shoulders straightened. When she lifted her phone and looked directly at Captain Manning, there was something burning in her dark eyes that made his condescending smile freeze on his face. "We're calling our father," she said, her voice no longer pleading. It was calm, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. Dead silence fell over the private terminal. Preston's fingers stopped mid-gesture. The smirking client suddenly looked uncomfortable because everyone just realized they had treated exactly the wrong family with such prejudice. Airport's private aviation terminal buzzed with its usual controlled elegance on this crisp Tuesday morning in October. Skyline Executive Aviation's charter flight SE471 to Boston was scheduled to depart in 2 hours, giving the identical twins plenty of time to navigate what should have been a routine boarding process for their important college tour trip. Zara and Yolanda Whitmore had been planning this journey for months. At 17, they were among Wellington Academy's most promising students. Zara with her 4.0 GPA and early admission to Harvard's pre-law program, Yolanda with her perfect SAT scores and scholarship offers from Yale's business school. Their father, Victor Whitmore, had finally agreed to charter a private jet for their college interviews, a milestone that represented trust, independence, and the beginning of their adult lives. What made this trip even more special was that it marked the first time Victor had allowed his daughters to handle the charter arrangements themselves, using the family's corporate account, but managing all the logistics independently. The charter had been booked a week earlier through Skyline Executive's premium portal, with full payment processed and confirmation received within hours. The twins approached the Skyline Executive Aviation check-in counter with the quiet confidence that came from excellent upbringings and legitimate business. Their charter confirmation printed at home clearly showed departure time 11:02 a.m. for Boston Logan Airport, with return scheduled for Thursday evening. Their student IDs from Wellington Academy were pristine, their excitement barely contained beneath their composed exteriors. Kyle Morrison looked up from his computer terminal with the practiced efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of high-net-worth clients. But when his eyes settled on the two young black women in front of him, something shifted in his demeanor. The professional smile became strained. The welcoming tone turned cautious. "Charter confirmation and identification," he said, his voice notably cooler than it had been for the white businessman he just helped board a similar Gulfstream G650. Zara placed their documents on the marble counter with careful precision. "Good morning. We're checking in for the Boston charter, departing at 11 a.m. Kyle picked up their charter confirmation, his eyebrows rising as he examined the private jet assignment and premium service package. He turned the documents over, held them up to the light, and examined them with the kind of scrutiny typically reserved for suspected forgeries. "These don't look right," he announced loud enough for other clients to hear. "Where did you get this charter confirmation?" Yolanda's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Our father arranged the charter directly through Skyline Executive's website. Is there a problem with the documentation?" Kyle's lips pressed into a thin line as he continued examining papers that were clearly legitimate and professionally printed. "I'll need to verify this with the system." "Wait here." He disappeared into a back office, taking their documents with him. The twins stood at the counter for nearly 20 minutes while other clients were processed efficiently around them. They could feel the stares, Hear the whispered comments. Sense the assumptions being made about two black teenagers with a private jet charter worth more than most people's annual salaries. The delay was excruciating. Zara checked her phone repeatedly, worried about their tight schedule. Their first college interview was scheduled for 3 p.m. at Harvard, followed by a dinner meeting with Yale administrators. Missing this charter would mean missing opportunities they'd worked years to earn. When Kyle finally returned, he placed new documentation on the counter with an air of false authority and barely concealed satisfaction. There was a problem in the system, he announced loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This charter has been canceled due to payment processing issues. What happened next would change everything the twins thought they knew about private aviation. Zara examined the cancellation notice with growing confusion and alarm. The document looked official, but something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. But this shows the charter was arranged and confirmed last week, she said, pulling out her phone to access their email confirmation. Our father has the booking receipt showing full payment was processed successfully. Kyle leaned forward across the marble counter, lowering his voice with barely concealed hostility that made nearby clients turn to stare. Listen, I don't know what kind of game you two are trying to play here, but certain people need to understand that private aviation isn't for everyone. You should be grateful commercial airlines exist for people in your situation. The phrase certain people hung in the air like poison gas. There was absolutely no mistaking his meaning, and the racial undertones were crystal clear to everyone within hearing distance. Yolanda's hands clenched at her sides, her entire body tensing with righteous anger, but Zara placed a restraining hand on her sister's arm. They had been taught by their parents and Wellington Academy counselors that displays of anger from young black women were too often weaponized against them, used as justification for even worse treatment. Our father specifically arranged this charter through your premium corporate portal, Zara insisted, keeping her voice level and professional despite the growing fire in her chest. The confirmation number is SE4E71, and I have the complete email chain documenting the transaction. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please. Kyle's smile turned predatory, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. Supervisors in an important meeting with actual clients. If you have a problem with the cancellation, you can take it up with customer service. They have a complaints department specifically for these kinds of situations. Next, the dismissal was brutal and final. Kyle had already turned his attention to the next client in line, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit who received the warm, professional greeting that had been denied to the twins. Humiliated, angry, and increasingly desperate about their tight timeline, the twins collected their altered documents and moved away from the counter. Other clients stared as they passed, some with what appeared to be sympathy, but most with the smug satisfaction of having their unconscious assumptions confirmed. Two black teenagers obviously didn't belong in the world of private aviation. We should call Dad right now, Yolanda whispered urgently as they found a quiet corner of the terminal. This is insane, and we're going to miss our interviews. No, Zara replied firmly, though doubt was beginning to creep into her voice. He specifically told us he has that crucial board meeting today with the company's largest investors. He asked us not to call unless there was a genuine emergency, and he trusted us to handle this trip independently. This feels like a genuine emergency to me, Yolanda shot back, her frustration finally beginning to show. We'll handle it ourselves first, Zara assured her sister, though she was starting to question whether they actually could. Let's try talking to airport security. Maybe they can verify our documents independently. But what they didn't know was that Kyle Morrison was already on the phone with various airport departments, painting a detailed picture of two suspicious teenagers who had attempted to use what appeared to be fraudulent charter confirmations. The discrimination they just experienced at the check-in counter was only the beginning of a systematic campaign designed to remove them from the airport entirely. But the truth about their treatment was even more shocking than they imagined. The private terminal security checkpoint should have been a routine formality. Zara and Yolanda had flown commercially many times before, understood standard procedures, and had packed their belongings carefully to avoid any complications or delays. But as they approached the screening area with their canceled charter documents, they immediately noticed something deeply troubling. White clients were moving through the checkpoint with minimal interaction and professional courtesy, while travelers who looked like them were being subjected to additional screening procedures with suspicious frequency. For random selection for enhanced security screening, announced Agent Parker Mitchell, though there was absolutely nothing random about the way his eyes had tracked the twins from the moment they entered the security area. His voice carried the authority of someone who had made these kinds of decisions hundreds of times before. The twins were directed to a separate screening lane, physically isolated from the general flow of clients and subjected to a completely different level of scrutiny. Their carefully packed belongings were unceremoniously dumped onto stainless steel tables for invasive inspection, and Agent Mitchell's hands were deliberately rough as he poured through their personal items, examining their electronics and documents with exaggerated suspicion. "What's this device?" Mitchell demanded, holding up Zara's laptop as if it were a potential weapon rather than standard student equipment. "It's a laptop for school," Zara replied calmly, fighting to keep her voice steady and professional. "I need it for my college interviews and to access my academic records." Mitchell opened the device without permission, scrolling through her files with absolutely no legal authority to conduct such a search. "Lot of legal documents and academic papers on here. You some kind of activist or troublemaker?" The question was loaded with accusation and racial profiling. Zara's legal documents were research papers for her AP government class, scholarship application essays, and college preparation materials. The completely normal academic work of a high-achieving student preparing for university admission. "I'm interested in pursuing law as a career," Zara answered carefully, recognizing that any show of indignation would be used against her. "Those are school assignments and college application materials." Mitchell's expression suggested he didn't believe a single word of her explanation. He spent an additional 15 minutes examining every file, every document, every piece of software on her computer, creating an obvious spectacle that drew stares and whispered comments from other clients. When he discovered Yolanda's prescription allergy medication in her carry-on bag, he held up the clearly labeled pharmacy bottle as if he'd discovered dangerous contraband. "What are these pills?" he demanded loudly. "Satine," Yolanda explained with forced patience, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "For seasonal allergies, the prescription information is clearly printed on the bottle, including my name, the prescribing doctor, and the pharmacy that filled it." But Mitchell was already calling for his supervisor, creating unnecessary drama and public embarrassment around completely legal medication that was obviously prescribed and properly labeled. The enhanced paydown that followed was invasive, humiliating, and deliberately excessive. The agents' hands lingered inappropriately. Their searches were far more intrusive than anything that could be justified by security concerns, and their loud commentary about the twins' belongings and appearance created a public spectacle designed to embarrass and intimidate. "Always have to be extra careful with these types," Mitchell announced to his colleague in a voice loud enough for everyone in the area to hear clearly. "You never know what they might be hiding or what kind of trouble they're planning to cause." A white woman waiting in the general security line pulled out her phone to record the obvious harassment and discriminatory treatment, but was immediately approached by additional security personnel and forced to delete the footage under threat of detention. Any potential witnesses to the systematic discrimination were quickly silenced or intimidated into compliance. By the time they were finally cleared to proceed, a full hour had passed. Their belongings had been carelessly and disrespectfully repacked. Zara's laptop showed new scratches and dings from rough handling, and they were now cutting dangerously close to their departure time with no room for additional delays. "Have a wonderful flight," Mitchell said with mock sweetness and obvious sarcasm. "Better hurry, though. I hear private charter companies are very strict about departure times, especially for clients who can actually afford their services." Little did anyone know that every word was being recorded for evidence. As they hurried through the terminal toward their departure gate, desperately trying to make up for lost time, Yolanda pulled out her phone with hands that were still shaking from anger and humiliation. "We need to call Dad right now," she said urgently. "This has gone way beyond ridiculous. This is systematic harassment, and we're going to miss our college interviews because of discrimination." Zara checked the time on her phone and shook her head with visible reluctance. "He's in that closed-door strategy session with the board of directors right now. His assistant specifically told us he couldn't be disturbed for any reason except a genuine life or death emergency, and he trusted us to handle this independently. We'll document everything and tell him when he calls tonight. What they didn't know was that their father, Victor Whitmore, was actually sitting in his private office at Skyline Executive Aviation's headquarters at that very moment, conducting his monthly comprehensive assessment of company culture and customer service quality. As the company's owner and CEO, a position he kept strictly private to shield his family from unwanted attention and to allow for honest evaluation of employee behavior, he was reviewing detailed customer service reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture of the very discrimination his daughters were experiencing in real time. The twins didn't have time to grab a proper meal, but they desperately needed something to eat before their long day of college interviews. Their attempt to get a quick snack at Sky Lounge Cafe was met with the exact same pattern of hostility and discrimination they'd experienced everywhere else in the terminal. The hostess, Paige Sterling, looked up from her phone with barely concealed disgust and obvious annoyance when she saw the two black teenagers approaching her station. "How many?" she asked curtly, her tone noticeably different from the warm, welcoming greeting she'd just given to the white couple directly ahead of them. "Two, please," Zara replied politely, maintaining her composure despite everything they'd been through. Paige made an exaggerated show of checking her reservation tablet, scrolling through screens, and frowning as if she were dealing with an incredibly complex logistical problem. "There's going to be about a 45-minute wait for a table," she announced with obvious satisfaction. Yolanda glanced around the restaurant in disbelief at the numerous empty tables clearly visible throughout the dining area. "But there are several open tables right there, and more opening up as people finish their meals." "Those are all reserved," Paige replied curtly, not bothering to look up from her tablet or acknowledge the obvious contradiction. "Your website clearly states that you don't take reservations," Zara pointed out, pulling up the restaurant's official page on her phone to display the policy. "It specifically says that seating is available on a first-come, first-served basis." Paige's face flushed with irritation at being caught in such an obvious lie. "Well, the website information is outdated and incorrect. We definitely do take reservations now, and all those tables you see are already spoken for by confirmed reservations." As if the entire scene had been carefully choreographed, a white couple walked in directly behind the twins without acknowledging the ongoing conversation or the fact that other customers were clearly ahead of them in line. Paige immediately brightened with genuine warmth and hospitality. "Two for lunch? Right this way. I have the perfect table available immediately." She grabbed menus and personally escorted the couple to one of the supposedly reserved tables, seating them with obvious enthusiasm and efficiency that contrasted sharply with the hostility and obstruction she'd shown the twins. "Excuse me," Yolanda called after her, her patience finally wearing dangerously thin. "We were here first, and you just told us there were no tables available for 45 minutes. Paige turned back with obvious annoyance and barely concealed anger. "Is there some kind of problem here?" The manager, Lance Morrison, appeared as if he'd been waiting in the wings for exactly this moment. His name tag identified him clearly as management, but his demeanor and body language suggested he'd already decided how this interaction was going to end. "These girls are causing a disruption," Paige explained quickly, deliberately mischaracterizing the entire situation. "I explained our reservation policy and wait times, but they're demanding immediate seating and questioning our procedures." "That's not what happened at all," Zara interjected calmly but firmly. "Your hostess told us there was a 45-minute wait because all tables were reserved, but there are clearly open tables throughout the restaurant, and she just seated people who arrived after us." Lance's expression didn't change even slightly. He hadn't taken his eyes off the twins since he'd arrived, hadn't bothered to look at the empty tables or the newly seated couple, and clearly had no interest in hearing their side of the story. "I understand you're upset about the wait time, but I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices," he said, though both girls had been speaking calmly and professionally throughout the entire interaction. "We have paying customers trying to enjoy their meals in a peaceful environment. The threat was implicit, but crystal clear. Comply with discrimination quietly or face escalating consequences." Rosa Kingsley, a Latina server who had been watching the interaction with growing concern and obvious discomfort, approached the group cautiously. She clearly wanted to help, but was afraid of the potential consequences. "Lance, I can definitely seat them at one of my tables," she offered quietly. "Table 12 just finished their meal and is ready to be cleaned and reset." "Stay out of this situation, Rosa," Lance snapped without even looking at her. "Go check on your other customers and let management handle management decisions." Rosa hesitated for a moment, torn between following direct orders from her supervisor and doing what was obviously right. With an apologetic glance at the twins that conveyed her genuine sympathy, she reluctantly retreated, but not before discreetly slipping her business card into Zara's hand, a small act of solidarity and witness that would prove crucial later. "Look," Lance said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that only the twins could hear. "I strongly suggest you find somewhere else to eat. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and right now you're not welcome in this establishment." The message was unmistakable and brutally clear. This wasn't about restaurant policies, wait times, or reservation systems. It was entirely about who belonged in first-class establishments and who didn't. What they didn't know was that one phone call would ground every aircraft in the Skyline executive fleet. Hungry, frustrated, and increasingly demoralized by the systematic discrimination they'd faced at every turn, the twins finally made their way to the departure gate for charter flight SE-4711. The gleaming Gulfstream G750 sat on the tarmac like a symbol of luxury and exclusivity that seemed increasingly out of their reach despite having legitimate confirmations and payment records. The departure gate area was bustling with pre-boarding activity when Zara and Yolanda arrived. Other clients were already queuing for the boarding process, chatting casually about business deals and vacation plans with the easy confidence of people who belonged in this world without question. The twins checked their documentation one final time, their original charter confirmation email, the cancellation notice from Kyle Morrison, and Rose's business card with her contact information for filing a formal complaint later. Something still felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Zara pulled out her phone and accessed her email, scrolling through their correspondence until she found the complete paper trail from their original booking. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Victor Whitmore had arranged the charter directly through Skyline Executive's premium corporate portal, with full payment processed immediately and confirmation received within hours. "Look at this," she whispered to Yolanda, showing her sister the screen. "Dad's original confirmation email shows everything was handled directly through Skyline Executive System. Kyle Morrison completely lied to us about payment problems." Yolanda's jaw tightened with anger as she reviewed the documentation. "So what do we do now? We can't exactly force our way onto a private jet, and we're running out of time for our interviews." "We document absolutely everything," Zara decided, her voice taking on the methodical, analytical tone that had made her Wellington Academy's star debate team, captain, and mock trial champion. "If we're going to fight this systematic discrimination, we need comprehensive evidence that can't be disputed or dismissed." They approached the gate agent's desk, where a harried representative named Olivia Peaton was processing client requests and boarding procedures with mechanical efficiency. When the twins presented their case, showing the original confirmation email versus the current cancellation notice, Olivia barely looked up from her computer screen. "The check-in agent made the appropriate adjustments based on system alerts," she said dismissively, as if she were discussing routine administrative paperwork rather than potential discrimination. "If there was an error in your original booking, it's been corrected through proper channels. But here's the complete email confirmation chain," Zara insisted, turning her phone screen toward Olivia to display the evidence. "My father specifically arranged this charter through your premium corporate portal. This isn't a booking error. This is an unauthorized cancellation without justification." Olivia finally looked up from her computer, her expression suggesting she was being asked to solve an impossibly complex technical problem rather than verify a simple charter booking that should take 30 seconds to confirm. "I don't see any record of a formal complaint being filed through our customer service department," she said, with bureaucratic indifference. "And even if there was some kind of system error, the aircraft is already configured for the current client manifest. There's nothing I can do at this point. It was a transparent lie, and everyone involved knew it perfectly well." The Gulfstream G650 was configured to accommodate up to 19 passengers in luxury seating arrangements, and Olivia had the complete authority to restore their charter booking with just a few keystrokes. But she wasn't going to use that authority for two black teenagers who, in her mind, probably didn't belong on private jets anyway. Yolanda pulled out her phone to document the interaction and create a record of the ongoing discrimination. But Olivia immediately became hostile and aggressive. Recording in the gate area isn't permitted under federal aviation regulations, she snapped, though she was completely misrepresenting the actual policies. Put that device away immediately, or I'll call security. We're not recording the gate area or any security procedures, Yolanda replied calmly, maintaining her composure despite her growing frustration. We're documenting our customer service interaction for potential civil rights complaints. Put it away now. The twins exchanged meaningful glances. They were being systematically stonewalled and intimidated at every single step of the process. But they weren't going to give up or accept discrimination passively. What came next shocked everyone at Miami Executive Airport. As the boarding process began, the twins watched in growing dismay as other clients moved through the procedures with smooth efficiency and professional courtesy. The contrast between their treatment and everyone else's was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore or dismiss as coincidence. But Captain Preston Manning, who had been conducting his final pre-flight briefing and safety checks, had been monitoring the situation from a distance. As Skyline Executive's most senior pilot and a company veteran with over 15 years of experience, he commanded significant respect and authority throughout the organization. Unfortunately, like many of his colleagues, he had developed deeply ingrained assumptions about who belonged in the rarefied world of luxury private aviation. When the twins finally approached the aircraft entrance with their documentation, Captain Manning was waiting for them with obvious suspicion and barely concealed hostility. "Good morning, ladies," he said with false pleasantness that fooled no one. "I'll need to examine your charter confirmations before you can board." Preston took their documents and began examining them with theatrical and exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light, comparing them to information on his tablet, and frowning as if he'd discovered major discrepancies or security concerns. "There seems to be a significant problem here," he announced loudly enough for other clients and airport personnel to hear clearly. "These documents appear to have been altered or modified. Please step aside while I verify their authenticity." "What kind of alterations?" Zara asked, though she already suspected where this was heading. "The formatting doesn't match our standard charter confirmations, and there are several inconsistencies in the booking codes," Preston claimed, making up technical problems that didn't exist. "I'm going to need to see additional identification and proof of payment." It was a completely absurd accusation. The charter confirmation had been printed directly from their email that morning and showed absolutely no signs of tampering, modification, or alteration. But Preston was creating a public scene, drawing maximum attention to the twins and painting them as potential security threats or fraudsters. "Here are our student IDs from Wellington Academy," Yolanda explained, producing their official identification cards. "They include the school seal, our photographs, and authorized signatures from school administrators." Preston inspected the IDs with the same theatrical suspicion he'd shown their other documents. Student identification can be easily fabricated with modern technology. "I need something more official and government-issued." "We're 17 years old," Zara pointed out with forced patience. "We don't have driver's licenses yet, and Skyline executives specifically confirmed these IDs were sufficient when our father arranged the charter booking." Preston reached for his radio with obvious drama and self-importance. "Security to departure gate SE4471, please. We have a situation requiring immediate assistance." The announcement echoed through the terminal, causing nearby clients to stop their conversations and stare at what appeared to be the apprehension of two teenage criminals. Some pulled out phones to record what they assumed would be an arrest, while others whispered among themselves about security threats and suspicious behavior. "This is discrimination," Yolanda stated firmly, no longer willing to pretend this was all just a series of unfortunate misunderstandings or administrative errors. "We have legitimate charter confirmations and proper identification. You're preventing us from boarding because we're black." Preston's face flushed red with anger at having his motivations called out so directly and publicly. "That's a very serious accusation, young lady. I could have you arrested and banned from this airport for making false claims against airline personnel." The threat hung in the air like a sword, designed to intimidate them into silence and compliance. But before the situation could escalate further, a new voice entered the conversation with authority that seemed to change the entire dynamic. What seems to be the problem here, Captain Manning? That's when the real truth about Skyline Executive emerged. The woman who approached was perhaps in her early 50s with dark skin, graying hair pulled back in a neat professional bun, and a demeanor that suggested significant experience and authority. Her name tag identified her as Simona Bradford's supervisor. For just a moment, the twins felt a surge of hope and relief. Surely another black woman would understand exactly what was happening and would intervene on their behalf to stop the obvious discrimination. They couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong. Simone Bradford had spent 15 grueling years climbing the corporate ladder at Skyline Executive Aviation, fighting against systemic barriers and unconscious bias every step of the way. She'd learned early in her career that survival in the system meant never making waves, never challenging the status quo, and certainly never taking the side of clients who complained about discrimination. She'd become exactly what the company wanted and needed, a black face in management, providing perfect cover for policies and practices that disproportionately affected people who looked exactly like her. These two are claiming their charter documents are legitimate, Captain Manning explained, deliberately mischaracterizing the entire situation to put the twins in the worst possible light. They're making serious accusations of discrimination when I'm simply following standard security protocols and verification procedures. Simone examined their charter confirmation and student IDs with the exact same suspicion and hostility her white colleagues had shown, her expressions suggesting she was dealing with obvious troublemakers and potential criminals rather than legitimate clients with proper documentation. Is there some specific reason you can't follow our standard boarding procedures like every other client? She asked, her tone sharp with disapproval and barely concealed contempt. The betrayal hit like a physical blow to the chest. Here was someone who should have understood their situation instinctively, someone who should have recognized the systematic pattern of treatment they'd experienced, someone who had probably faced similar discrimination herself. Instead, she was actively helping to perpetuate the very system that oppressed them all. "We've been following your procedures all day," Zara replied carefully, recognizing that any show of emotion would be used against them. "We've been subjected to additional screening at every checkpoint, had our legitimate charter illegally canceled without justification, and now we're being accused of fraud for trying to board with proper documentation." Simone's expression hardened further, her disapproval becoming more obvious and aggressive. "I don't appreciate your attitude or your accusations, young lady. If you continue making unfounded claims against our professional staff, I'll be forced to deny you boarding entirely and have you removed from the premises." The threat was crystal clear. "Shut up. Accept the discriminatory treatment quietly or face even worse consequences, including potential arrest." Azara looked at her sister, seeing her own sense of defeat and despair reflected perfectly in Yolanda's eyes. They were exhausted, hungry, and rapidly running out of options. Their college interviews were scheduled to begin in just a few hours, and missing this charter would mean missing opportunities they'd worked for years to earn. The systematic discrimination had been bad enough when it came from white employees, but this betrayal by someone who should have been an ally felt like the final crushing blow. "Fine," Zara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We understand." But as Captain Manning made a show of examining their documents one final time, and they prepared to accept whatever crumbs of accommodation might be offered, both twins were secretly documenting everything on their phones. They might have been forced to accept this treatment today, but they weren't going to let it end here without consequences. What they didn't know was that one final devastating humiliation awaited them before they could reach their seats. What followed would destroy the careers of everyone involved. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a final gauntlet, and at its end stood one last obstacle to their journey. Logan Cartwright, Skyline Executive's onboard services coordinator, stood guard at the aircraft entrance with the lazy authority of someone who'd made snap judgments about clients based on their appearance for years. Most passengers flowed past him with minimal interaction. A quick glance at their confirmation, a professional nod, and they were welcomed aboard with courtesy and efficiency. But when Zara and Yolanda approached, Logan's demeanor immediately shifted into the now familiar pattern of suspicion and hostility they'd encountered throughout their airport ordeal. "Hold on there," he said, stepping directly into their path and blocking access to the aircraft. "I need to double-edge check case something important." He took their charter confirmations and made an elaborate show of examining them against a printed manifest, though it was obvious he was simply stalling for time and creating another public spectacle. Other clients were forced to wait behind them in line, creating exactly the kind of embarrassing scene that had characterized their entire airport experience. These seats were supposed to be assigned to other clients, Logan announced, though he was clearly reading from no official document or manifest. "There seems to be some major confusion about your reservations and boarding eligibility." Zara's patience, worn completely thin by hours of systematic mistreatment and discrimination, finally reached its absolute breaking point. "There's no confusion whatsoever," she said, her voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "This is the charter we arranged after our original booking was illegally canceled without justification. We've been harassed, delayed, and discriminated against at every single step of this process, and we're not going to accept any more lies or excuses." The words hung in the air like a direct challenge to the entire system. Logan's face flushed with rage. No one, especially not a black teenager, had ever spoken to him with such directness and moral authority. "That's it," he snarled, reaching for his radio with obvious satisfaction. "Security to JetBridge SE4471. We have disruptive passengers requiring immediate removal from the aircraft." Within minutes, two security guards appeared. Tom Bennett and Frank Miller, both approaching with the aggressive posture and hostile demeanor of men who'd already decided the twins were criminals and troublemakers before hearing a single word of explanation. "What seems to be the issue here?" Bennett asked, addressing Logan directly rather than the twins, making it clear whose version of events he was prepared to believe. "These two are refusing to accept their charter cancellation and are making false accusations against multiple airline staff members," Logan explained, painting a completely fabricated picture of the situation. "They're becoming increasingly disruptive and are interfering with normal boarding procedures for legitimate clients. We are not being disruptive in any way." Yolanda protested with as much dignity as she could muster. "We are not being disruptive in any way." Yolanda protested with as much dignity as she could muster, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure and intimidation tactics being employed against them. "We're simply trying to understand why our completely legitimate charter keeps being questioned, canceled, and now blocked by staff members who seem determined to prevent us from traveling." Miller, the larger and more intimidating of the two security guards, stepped forward with obvious intent to physically intimidate the teenagers. His bulk cast a shadow over them as he positioned himself uncomfortably close, using his size as a weapon of psychological warfare. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to immediately lower your voice and cooperate fully with airline personnel," he said in a tone that suggested non-compliance would result in immediate arrest. "Any further resistance or disruption will result in your removal from these premises and potential criminal charges." "We've been cooperating all day long," Zara replied, her voice remaining remarkably calm despite her rising anger in the increasingly threatening situation. "We've submitted to illegal searches that violated our privacy, accepted unauthorized changes to our legitimate charter booking, and endured systematic harassment and discrimination from multiple employees. We're not going to be intimidated into silence anymore, and we're certainly not going to accept being treated like criminals for the crime of expecting equal treatment and basic human dignity." The jet bridge had transformed into a public theater, with other clients openly recording the confrontation on their phones as the situation escalated beyond what anyone had expected. Some passengers looked genuinely sympathetic to the twins' plight, recognizing obvious discrimination when they saw it, while others seemed convinced they were witnessing the rightful apprehension of troublemakers who had finally been caught in their deception. Recording security procedures is strictly prohibited under federal aviation regulations, Bennett declared authoritatively, though no actual security procedure was taking place, and he was completely misrepresenting the law. "I need everyone to put their phones away immediately or face potential detention and questioning. It was a transparent lie designed specifically to eliminate witnesses and prevent documentation of their discriminatory actions. But several passengers continued recording anyway, sensing they were witnessing something historically significant and morally important. Logan pulled out what appeared to be a printed manifest and made an elaborate show of consulting it, though everyone present knew he was simply trying to create justification for his earlier false claims and discriminatory behavior. According to this official document, he announced with theatrical authority, these seats were reassigned due to operational requirements and safety concerns. These individuals will need to make alternative transportation arrangements immediately. The charter isn't operationally compromised in any way, Zara stated with the factual precision that had made her Wellington Academy's champion debater. I can clearly see through the aircraft door that the jet is fully prepared for departure. The cabin is properly configured and other passengers are boarding normally. You're attempting to remove us because you've made assumptions about who belongs on private aircraft based entirely on our race and age. The direct accusation of racism hung in the air like an explosive charge, and Logan's reaction confirmed its absolute accuracy, his face contorted with barely controlled rage at having his true motivations exposed so clearly and publicly. "That's enough of your accusations and disruption," he snarled with unconcealed venom. "You two are now officially banned from this aircraft and from Skyline Executive Aviation permanently. Security, escort them off the premises immediately and ensure they don't return." But Zara wasn't finished yet. With the same calm precision and moral authority that had made her Wellington Academy's most respected student leader, she pulled out her phone and began making what would prove to be the most consequential call in Skyline Executive Aviation's corporate history. "We're calling our father," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority and unwavering confidence. Something fundamental in her tone, not pleading, not desperate, but coldly certain and completely controlled, made everyone present pause in their tracks. Logan, who had been gesturing dramatically to security guards, stopped mid-motion. The guards, who had been preparing to physically remove the twins from the aircraft, hesitated uncertainly. Other passengers pressed closer, sensing that the power dynamic was about to shift in ways no one had anticipated, because for the first time all day, Zara Whitmore sounded exactly like someone who possessed real substantial and potentially devastating power. "Dad," Zara said when the call connected, her voice carrying across the jet bridge with crystal clarity and absolute confidence. "We're at Miami Executive Airport and Skyline Executive Aviation is refusing to honor our legitimate charter booking. We need your immediate assistance and intervention." The voice that responded through the phone speaker was calm, measured, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed immediately and without question by powerful people in positions of significant responsibility. "Zara, sweetheart, tell me exactly what's happening there. Take your time and give me every detail." Logan tried desperately to interrupt the conversation and regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Miss, you cannot make personal phone calls on the jet bridge during active boarding procedures. This is a violation of federal aviation regulations." And Mr. Cartwright, the voice from the phone, cut him off with surgical precision and ice-cold authority. "This is Victor Whitmore. You will not interrupt my daughter again, and you will not make any further attempts to intimidate or silence her." The blood drained completely from Logan's face as the implications of that name hit him like a physical blow. Victor Whitmore wasn't just any concerned parent making empty threats. He was Skyline Executive Aviation's owner, CEO, and the man who signed Logan's paychecks and had the absolute power to end his career with a single word. The twins looked at each other in genuine surprise and growing amazement. They had always known their father was successful in the aviation industry, but they had never fully understood or appreciated the true extent of his influence, power, and authority within the private aviation sector. "Now," Victor continued, his voice carrying across the jet bridge for everyone present to hear clearly, "I want you to listen very carefully to what my daughters are about to tell you about their experience today, because what you and your colleagues have done isn't just morally wrong and legally questionable. It's about to cost Skyline Executive Aviation everything it has worked to build." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Security guards stepped back uncertainly, suddenly realizing they might be on the wrong side of a situation that was spiraling far beyond their understanding or control. Logan looked like a man watching his entire career collapse in real time. Other passengers pressed even closer, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Captain Preston Manning, who had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit, emerged with obvious concern and growing panic as he began to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. "Mr. Whitmore," Preston said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to salvage an increasingly impossible situation. "I'm Captain Manning. I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstandings quickly and professionally. There may have been some communication errors or procedural confusion." "Captain Manning?" Victor's voice turned even colder and more dangerous. "There have been no misunderstandings or communication errors. What has happened here today is systematic, deliberate, and documented racial discrimination against my daughters by multiple employees of my company. They have been harassed, humiliated, and threatened with arrest for the crime of attempting to use a charter service that was legitimately purchased and properly confirmed." Victor's words hit like hammer blows, each accusation more damning than the last. The scope of what had occurred was becoming clear, not just to the immediate participants, but to everyone within hearing distance. "Zara, Yolanda," Victor said, his voice softening when he addressed his daughters directly, "I need you to stay exactly where you are and continue documenting everything that happens. Don't move from that location. Don't accept any offers or compromises from airline staff, and keep recording every interaction. I'm implementing Emergency Protocol Alpha immediately." The twins exchanged confused glances, having never heard of such a protocol in all their years of listening to their father discuss business matters. "What's Protocol Alpha, Dad?" Yolanda asked with genuine curiosity. "For you'll understand in approximately 2 minutes," Victor replied with grim satisfaction and barely controlled anger. "Canned every single person who treated you like criminals today is about to learn exactly why I kept my ownership of this company private, and why that was the biggest mistake they could possibly have made." Throughout the terminal, departure boards began flickering ominously with updates that would send shockwaves through the entire private aviation industry. Charter after charter, flight after flight began showing the same unprecedented status. Delayed operational review required. "What's happening to all the flights?" someone in the crowd asked with growing alarm. Victor's voice carried a tone of grim satisfaction mixed with righteous anger as he explained the scope of his response. "Emergency Protocol Alpha means that every single Skyline executive aircraft currently on the tarmac at gates or in preparation for departure is being immediately grounded pending a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices and systematic civil rights violations. Tow Skyline executive aircraft will move until I am personally satisfied that this company deserves to operate." The magnitude of Victor Whitmore's response left everyone speechless and struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. Logan Cartwright, who moments before had been aggressively confronting two teenagers with the confidence of someone who held all the power, now looked like a man facing his own professional execution. "Sir," Preston Manning said carefully, his voice trembling as he tried to grasp the full implications of what was happening. "Surely this is an extreme overreaction to what amounts to customer service miscommunications. Grounding our entire fleet will cost millions of dollars and strand hundreds of clients across the country." "Captain Manning," Victor's voice carried deadly calm and absolute authority, "there have been no customer service miscommunications. What has occurred here is systematic racial discrimination captured on multiple security cameras, witnessed by dozens of people, and documented by my daughters in real time. More importantly, this represents a pattern of behavior that I now realize has been festering within my company for years, while I trusted others to maintain the standards of dignity and respect that should define every client interaction. The implications were staggering and went far beyond the immediate situation." Victor wasn't just responding to his daughter's treatment, he was acknowledging that their experience had revealed systemic problems that demanded comprehensive investigation and radical transformation. Other clients throughout the terminal were now openly staring and recording, many live streaming the confrontation as word spread rapidly through social media about what was unfolding at Miami Executive Airport. The hashtag Skyline Executive Discrimination was already beginning to trend as the story spread far beyond the confines of the private aviation terminal. Kyle Morrison, the ground operations supervisor who had started the entire ordeal by canceling the twins' legitimate charter, appeared at the jet bridge with obvious panic and desperation written across his face. "Mr. Whitmore," he said breathlessly, "I'm Kyle Morrison from ground operations. If there were any errors in processing today, I'm sure we can resolve them immediately and get your daughters on their way without any further delays." "Mr. Morrison," Victor replied with ice in his voice, "you personally told my daughters that certain people need to understand that private aviation isn't for everyone. You canceled their legitimate charter without justification, accused them of fraud, and suggested they should be grateful that commercial airlines exist for people in their situation. Would you like to explain exactly what you meant by those comments?" Kyle's face went white as he realized that every discriminatory word he had spoken was being quoted back to him verbatim, apparently from detailed records that had been maintained throughout the day. "Sir, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about my comments. I was simply following standard verification procedures." Mr. Morrison Victor cut him off ruthlessly. "My daughters have recordings of your exact words. Security cameras captured your behavior, and multiple witnesses observed your discriminatory actions. There was no misunderstanding. There was deliberate, systematic racism directed at paying customers because you made assumptions based entirely on their race and age." Parker Mitchell, the security agent who had subjected the twins to invasive and unnecessary searches, appeared next. His face flushed with the dawning realization that his career was in serious jeopardy. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to clarify that all security procedures were conducted according to standard protocols and federal regulations," he said desperately. "Mr. Mitchell," Victor replied with barely controlled fury, "you subjected my daughters to invasive searches that violated their privacy and dignity, examined their personal electronics without legal authority, and made public comments about being extra careful with these types. And you then attempted to prevent witnesses from documenting your discriminatory behavior. Which federal regulations authorize racial profiling and illegal searches based on skin color?" The question hung in the air unanswered because everyone present knew that no such regulations existed. Paige Sterling and Lance Morrison from the Sky Lounge Cafe had also arrived, both looking increasingly panicked as they began to understand the scope of what they had become involved in. "Mr. Whitmore," Lance began nervously, "if there were any issues with service at our establishment, I assure you they will be addressed immediately through our standard complaint resolution procedures." "Mr. Morrison," Victor's voice was now openly hostile, "you personally told my daughters they weren't welcome in your establishment, seated other customers ahead of them despite their earlier arrival, and instructed your staff not to assist them. When a server attempted to help, you explicitly told her to stay away from my daughters. This wasn't a service issue. This was systematic exclusion based on race. As each employee was confronted with the evidence of their discriminatory behavior, the scope of what had occurred became increasingly clear. This wasn't a series of isolated incidents or unfortunate misunderstandings. It was a coordinated pattern of discrimination that had been accepted as normal operating procedure. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Furthermore, Victor continued relentlessly, "I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing security footage, customer service records, and employee communications from today's events. What I've discovered is that this systematic discrimination against my daughters was not an aberration. It was entirely consistent with how this company has been treating minority customers for years. While I trusted others to maintain our standards, the words hit like a nuclear explosion. Whitmore wasn't just angry about his daughter's treatment. He was acknowledging that their experience had exposed a corporate culture that had systematically failed the very principles he thought he had established. Within hours of Victor Whitmore's emergency protocol implementation, Miami Executive Airport had transformed into the epicenter of a rapidly expanding national conversation about discrimination in the aviation industry. News crews, civil rights advocates, and federal investigators descended on the facility as the story of 2 black teenagers being systematically discriminated against by employees of their father's own company captured headlines across the country. The twins, still standing on the jet bridge where the confrontation had reached its climax, found themselves surrounded by a growing crowd of supporters, witnesses, and investigators who were documenting every detail of what had transpired. Their phones had become repositories of evidence that would prove crucial in the comprehensive investigation that was already beginning. Victor arrived at the airport in person within 2 hours, accompanied by a formidable team of civil rights attorneys, corporate investigators, federal compliance experts, and public relations specialists who immediately began the complex process of documenting the systematic discrimination and implementing comprehensive reforms. When he walked into the terminal where his daughters were waiting, the reunion was both deeply emotional and profoundly powerful. The man who had just paralyzed an entire aviation company to defend his children's dignity embraced them with the fierce protectiveness of a parent who would stop at nothing to ensure justice. "Dad," Zara said as she hugged him tightly, "we're sorry we disrupted your meetings and caused such a massive crisis for the company." "Sweetheart," Victor replied, holding both twins close, "you didn't disrupt anything or cause any crisis. You exposed something that desperately needed to be exposed, and I'm incredibly proud of how you conducted yourselves with dignity and courage throughout this ordeal. The crisis was already here. You just forced us to confront it honestly." The investigation that followed was swift, comprehensive, and devastating in its findings. Security camera footage confirmed every detail of the twins' account with crystal clarity. Digital records proved that their charter had been legitimately booked and paid for without any payment issues whatsoever. Audio recordings captured every discriminatory comment, every false accusation, and every attempt to intimidate or silence them. But the investigation revealed something even more troubling than the immediate incidents. This wasn't an isolated case of individual prejudice, but rather a systematic pattern of discriminatory behavior that had been affecting minority customers for years. "Mr. Whitmore," reported Jennifer Chen, the lead civil rights investigator, "our preliminary review has uncovered a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior affecting at least 73 customers over the past 3 years. Minority clients were routinely subjected to additional scrutiny, questioned about their ability to afford services, and in numerous cases denied service entirely based on employee assumptions about their legitimacy as customers." Victor's jaw tightened with anger and profound disappointment as he reviewed the mounting evidence. How many customers are we talking about in total, and how extensive was the systematic nature of this discrimination? Based on customer service complaints, security footage, and employee communications we've reviewed so far, we're looking at potentially over 100 documented cases of discriminatory treatment, with the actual number likely being significantly higher due to underreporting. The discrimination appears to have been not only systematic, but actively encouraged by middle management who viewed certain demographic groups as inherently suspicious or illegitimate customers. The scope of the problem was staggering and went far beyond anything Victor had imagined possible within his own company. The corporate culture he thought he had established had been systematically undermined by employees who felt entitled to discriminate based on their personal prejudices. Kyle Morrison, the ground operations supervisor who had initiated the twins' ordeal, was among the first to face consequences. His attempt to provide a defensive explanation during his disciplinary hearing only made his situation worse. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to understand that I was simply following procedures that I believed were in the company's best interests," he said desperately. "When I saw 2 teenagers with a high-value charter, I thought it was my responsibility to verify their legitimacy more carefully." "Mr. Morrison," Victor replied with cold precision, "you didn't verify anything more carefully. You made assumptions based entirely on their race and age, canceled their legitimate charter without justification, and when confronted with evidence of their legitimacy, you suggested they should be grateful for commercial airline options. That wasn't following procedures. That was implementing your personal prejudices as company policy." Parker Mitchell's disciplinary hearing was equally damning. His attempts to justify the invasive searches and discriminatory treatment fell apart under scrutiny. "Sir, enhanced security screening is sometimes necessary when dealing with unusual situations or suspicious behavior," he claimed weakly. "Mr. Mitchell," Victor responded, "what was suspicious about 2 well-dressed honor students with proper identification and legitimate charter confirmations?" What behavior did they exhibit that justified invasive searches, examination of their personal electronics, and public commentary about being extra careful with these types? The only unusual thing about the situation was your decision to treat them differently based on their appearance. Captain Preston Manning's hearing revealed the depth of institutional bias that had infected the company's operations. His defense was perhaps the most revealing of all. Mr. Whitmore, in my 15 years with this company, I've always tried to maintain the highest standards of safety and security. Sometimes that requires making difficult judgment calls about passenger legitimacy, he said, apparently believing this somehow justified his actions. Captain Manning, Victor replied with barely controlled fury, you made no judgment calls about passenger legitimacy. You participated in systematic harassment of legitimate customers, created false security alerts to justify discrimination, and threatened to have them arrested for questioning your unprofessional behavior. Your 15 years of experience apparently taught you nothing about treating all customers with equal dignity and respect. But perhaps the most disappointing disciplinary hearing involved Simone Bradford, the black supervisor, whose betrayal had been particularly painful for the twins to experience. Mr. Whitmore, she said during her hearing, I've worked incredibly hard to reach my position in this company, and I've always tried to maintain professional standards and avoid any appearance of favoritism or special treatment. Or do, Miss Bradford, Victor replied with profound sadness. You didn't avoid favoritism. You implemented systematic discrimination against people who look like you in order to protect your position within a biased system. Instead of using your authority to ensure equal treatment, you became complicit in perpetuating the very prejudices that undoubtedly affected your own career advancement. The consequences for the employees involved were swift and decisive, but Victor's response went far beyond individual punishment. 6 months after the incident that had grounded Skyline Executive Aviation's entire fleet, the company bore little resemblance to its former self. The transformation hadn't been easy, comfortable, or inexpensive. Changing a corporate culture that had enabled systematic discrimination for years required more than policy changes and training videos. It demanded a fundamental reconstruction of how the company viewed its relationship with customers, employees, and the broader community it served. The Accountability and Justice Council that Victor had created was meeting in Skyline Executive's renovated Miami training facility. A diverse group of 25 people tasked with redesigning the company's approach to customer service, employee relations, and corporate responsibility. The council included civil rights experts, customer service specialists, former victims of discrimination, community leaders, and most surprisingly to some observers, several of the employees who had discriminated against the twins. Kyle Morrison sat uncomfortably at the polished conference table, listening with growing understanding and shame as Rosa Kingsley described the psychological impact of workplace discrimination on employees who witnessed it but felt powerless to intervene effectively. Every single time I saw Lance make racist comments about customers or watch colleagues treat minority clients differently, I felt like I was dying inside a little bit more, Rosa explained with painful honesty. But I desperately needed my job to support my family, and I was terrified of the consequences if I spoke up. So I stayed quiet, hated myself for my cowardice, and became complicit in a system I knew was fundamentally wrong. Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat as her words hit home. 6 months of intensive workshops, sensitivity training, and victim impact testimonials had forced him to confront patterns in his own behavior that he had previously rationalized away as normal business practices. The training hadn't been just about learning new policies and procedures. It had been about understanding the profound human impact of his discriminatory actions and developing genuine empathy for the people he had harmed. I never thought of myself as a racist person, Kyle admitted during one particularly difficult and emotionally charged session. I convinced myself that I was just doing my job professionally and following standard verification procedures. But listening to all these stories and testimonials, I realize now that I was creating different standards and procedures for different people based entirely on assumptions and stereotypes I didn't even consciously acknowledge I was making. Parker Mitchell's transformation had been even more dramatic and comprehensive. The security agent who had subjected the twins to invasive and humiliating searches was now working directly with federal authorities and civil rights organizations to identify and eliminate patterns of discriminatory profiling in airport security procedures nationwide. I convinced myself that enhanced screening of certain passengers was keeping everyone safer and was justified by security concerns, he said during a recorded interview that would become part of Skyline Executive's comprehensive training materials. But when I honestly examined my decision-making process and the data on actual security threats, I realized I was screening people based on stereotypes and prejudices, not legitimate security indicators. I was making everyone less safe by wasting time and resources on discriminatory practices instead of focusing on real security concerns. The most profound transformation had occurred in Simone Bradford, the Black supervisor who had betrayed the twins' expectations by supporting and perpetuating the discriminatory system. Her journey toward understanding and accountability had been the most difficult and emotionally challenging of all the employees involved. Her breakthrough had come during a particularly intense council session when a young Black flight attendant described being told by a supervisor to modify her natural hairstyle because it might make some customers uncomfortable or appear unprofessional. I said those exact same words to a new employee just 18 months ago, Simone had admitted, her voice breaking with emotion and shame. I told myself I was helping her succeed in the corporate world and preparing her for the realities of business. But I was actually perpetuating the same discriminatory system that had forced me to deny and suppress parts of my own identity to be accepted and advanced professionally. The council's work was producing measurable and significant results throughout the company and the broader industry. Skyline Executive had implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in the private aviation sector, with mandatory training that went far beyond superficial diversity exercises to address unconscious bias, bystander intervention techniques, and systematic institutional change. An anonymous reporting system allowed both customers and employees to flag concerning interactions without fear of retaliation or professional consequences. Most importantly, these reports were taken seriously and investigated thoroughly, with real consequences for verified discrimination and meaningful support for those who experienced or witnessed it. The company had also made fundamental structural changes to prevent future discrimination. Hiring and promotion practices were completely redesigned to reduce bias and ensure equal opportunity. Customer satisfaction metrics were carefully adjusted to ensure they didn't inadvertently penalize employees for enforcing policies equally across all customer demographics. Upper management compensation was now partially tied to diversity and inclusion metrics, creating direct financial incentives for executives to take anti-discrimination efforts seriously. Financial analysts and industry experts had initially predicted disaster for the company, with some forecasting that Skyline Executive would lose up to 30% of its market value as it diverted resources and attention from operational efficiency to social justice initiatives. Preston Harrington, a former board member, who had been forced to resign after attempting to cover up the discrimination, had been particularly vocal in predicting the company's inevitable downfall. But something remarkable and unexpected had happened instead. After an initial period of adjustment and some customer turnover, Skyline Executive's customer satisfaction scores had begun to rise dramatically across all demographic groups. Employee retention had improved significantly as staff reported feeling more valued, respected, and proud of their workplace environment. The anticipated mass exodus of business customers never materialized. In fact, several major corporations had specifically switched their private aviation contracts to Skyline Executive, citing the company's ethical leadership and commitment to civil rights as factors that align with their own corporate values and social responsibility initiatives. We're witnessing something that shouldn't be surprising, but unfortunately is, Victor explained during a board meeting 6 months after the transformation began. When you treat all customers with genuine dignity and respect, regardless of their background, when you create a workplace where all employees feel valued and supported, and when you demonstrate authentic commitment to civil rights and social justice, the entire operation improves dramatically. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was fundamentally bad business that was poisoning our corporate culture and limiting our growth potential. The twins had become powerful advocates for systematic change, speaking at conferences, consulting with other companies, and working with civil rights organizations to implement similar accountability programs across various industries. Their story had inspired young people throughout the country and internationally, demonstrating that individuals could challenge discriminatory systems and create meaningful, lasting transformation. But their most important test was still coming, for in 1 week they would be flying Skyline Executive again from Miami to New York to see whether the changes were genuine and permanent or merely cosmetic public relations gestures designed to weather the media storm. If you believe that Zara and Yolanda deserve to be treated with the same respect and dignity as every other customer, regardless of their race or age, type respect below. The consequences of their courage were just beginning to reshape an entire industry. Stories of courage, dignity, and justice like Zara and Yolanda's inspire people all around the world to stand up for what's right and demand equal treatment. These young women prove that challenging discrimination can transform entire industries and create lasting change that protects future generations. Let us know what country and city you're watching from so we can see how far these powerful messages of human dignity and civil rights are reaching across our global community. 1 year after their experience that had grounded an entire aviation company, Zara and Yolanda Whitmore stood once again at Miami Executive Airport's private terminal. They were at the same facility where they had been systematically discriminated against, the same terminal where they had been accused of fraud and threatened with arrest, the same location where they had been forced to document evidence of racism and fight for their basic dignity as human beings. But everything was fundamentally and dramatically different. Now the gate agent, a young Latina woman named Sofia Rodriguez, checked their charter confirmation with genuine warmth and professional efficiency. "Good afternoon, ladies. New York today for more college visits." She processed their documentation without excessive scrutiny, treating them with the same casual courtesy and respect. She showed every customer regardless of their appearance or background. "Yes," Zara replied, still slightly amazed that this ordinary routine interaction, completely unremarkable to most travelers, represented such a profound transformation from their previous devastating experience. They moved through security with minimal delay and appropriate professionalism. The screening process was thorough but respectful, conducted by agents who treated them as valued customers rather than potential criminals. Their belongings were handled carefully, their privacy was respected, and their documentation was processed efficiently without discriminatory questioning or invasive searches. At the Sky Lounge Cafe, where they had previously been denied service and excluded based on their race, they were seated immediately by a hostess who apologized for a brief delay while their preferred table was cleaned and prepared. The service was attentive and professional with staff members who treated them as welcome guests rather than unwanted intruders. As they boarded their charter aircraft, they were greeted by Captain Maria Santos, a Latina pilot whose natural hairstyle and confident demeanor would have been deemed unprofessional under Skyline executives' previous discriminatory policies. She welcomed them aboard with genuine warmth and pride, representing the kind of authentic diversity the company now embraced rather than merely tolerated for public relations purposes. "Welcome aboard, ladies," Captain Santos said with a smile that reflected genuine hospitality rather than artificial courtesy. "We're honored to be flying you to New York today, and I hope you have a wonderful experience with Skyline Executive Aviation." As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, the twins reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The discrimination they had faced had been real, painful, and traumatic, but their response had created ripple effects and systematic changes they could never have imagined possible. Kyle Morrison was now leading comprehensive sensitivity training sessions for customer service representatives throughout the aviation industry, using his own transformation from discriminatory employee to civil rights advocate as a powerful example of the possibility for redemption and genuine change. His presentations had become mandatory training at over 40 aviation companies across the country. Parker Mitchell had become a federal consultant specializing in eliminating discriminatory profiling in airport security procedures, working with the Transportation Security Administration to develop new protocols that protected both security and civil rights. His expertise in recognizing the patterns he had once perpetrated made him uniquely qualified to help prevent future incidents of discrimination. Captain Preston Manning had left the aviation industry entirely and enrolled in a master's program in social work and conflict resolution. His experience of being held accountable for his discriminatory actions had led to profound personal transformation, and he was now dedicated to helping other people examine their own unconscious biases and develop more inclusive perspectives. Simone Bradford had been promoted to Director of Diversity and Inclusion for all of Skyline Executive's operations, leading the company's transformation efforts with the passion and commitment of someone who understood both the damage that discrimination could cause and the profound importance of creating genuinely inclusive environments. Her journey from enabler of discrimination to champion of civil rights had made her one of the most respected voices in corporate diversity initiatives. Even Lance Morrison, the restaurant manager who had excluded them from the Sky Lounge Cafe, had undergone significant personal and professional transformation. The restaurant chain had implemented Skyline Executive's anti-discrimination model across all their locations, with Lance serving as a case study in their comprehensive training programs about the importance of equal treatment and inclusive hospitality. But the changes extended far beyond individual transformation and corporate policy adjustments. The aviation industry as a whole had been forced to confront its treatment of minority customers in ways that would have been unimaginable before the twins' experience. Congressional hearings had led to new federal regulations requiring transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and standardized training for all aviation industry employees. Other airlines and private aviation companies had implemented their own accountability measures, though none as comprehensive or effective as Skyline Executive's groundbreaking program. The twins had testified before Congress, spoken at major universities, and worked with civil rights organizations to expand their anti-discrimination model to other industries, including hospitality, retail, healthcare, and financial services. Their story had become a catalyst for broader conversations about institutional racism and the power of individual action to create systematic social change. As their flight approached LaGuardia Airport, Zara opened her laptop to review her notes for the next day's presentation at Columbia Law School, where she was now a sophomore after deferring her admission by a year to work full-time on civil rights advocacy. Yolanda was studying international business and corporate ethics at Yale, focusing her academic work on developing sustainable approaches to diversity and inclusion in global corporations. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into New York," came Captain Santos's voice over the intercom. "On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for choosing Skyline Executive Aviation. We know you have many options in private aviation, and we're honored that you trusted us to provide not just safe and comfortable transportation, but service that honors the dignity and worth of every passenger who flies with us." The words were more than corporate marketing script. They represented a fundamental shift in how the company understood its mission and responsibilities. Transportation wasn't just about moving people efficiently from one location to another. It was about treating every human being with the respect, courtesy, and dignity they deserved, regardless of their background, appearance, or perceived social status. As they deplaned at LaGuardia Airport, the twins were approached by a young black girl, perhaps 9 years old, traveling with her family from Miami to visit colleges with her older sister. "Are you the twins who changed the airplane company?" she asked with the innocent directness that only children possess. Zara knelt down to the child's eye level, remembering her own feelings of vulnerability and determination exactly 1 year earlier. "We're Zara and Yolanda. What's your name, sweetheart?" "I'm Zoe. My mom told me that you made it, so people like us get treated the same as everyone else when we fly on airplanes." Yolanda felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized the profound impact of their courage. This child would never know the fear, humiliation, and systematic discrimination they had experienced. She would travel through the world with one less barrier to overcome, one less source of anxiety and stress, one less reason to feel like a second-class citizen in her own country. "That's exactly right, Zoe," Zara said gently but firmly. "And you know what's most important? If anyone ever treats you unfairly or differently because of how you look, you have the right to speak up and demand better treatment. Your voice matters. Your dignity is important, and you deserve to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." The child nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson with the seriousness it deserved, and then ran back to her parents, who smiled gratefully at the twins' before disappearing into the bustling crowd of travelers. As Zara and Yolanda walked through LaGuardia's busy terminal toward their next chapter, they carried with them the profound knowledge that their courage had created something far more significant and lasting than individual justice. They had helped build a world where that little girl and countless others like her could travel with dignity and confidence, knowing that their rights would be protected and their humanity would be respected. The twins paused at the large windows overlooking the tarmac, watching as aircraft from dozens of different airlines prepared for departure. Each plane represented thousands of passengers who would now benefit from the industry-wide changes that had stemmed from their refusal to accept discrimination quietly. "Do you ever think about what Dad said that day on the jet bridge?" Yolanda asked thoughtfully, "about how we didn't cause a crisis, but exposed one that was already there." "Every single day," Zara replied, her voice filled with quiet pride and determination. "But I also think about what we prove to ourselves and the world, that when you refuse to accept good enough as actually good enough, when you demand that institutions live up to their stated values rather than their hidden practices, real change becomes not just possible, but inevitable." Their phones buzzed simultaneously with a news alert that made them both smile. Federal Aviation Administration announces comprehensive anti-discrimination training requirements for all commercial and private aviation employees nationwide based on the groundbreaking Skyline executive model developed after the Whitmore incident. Yolanda grinned at her sister. "Looks like our work is having an even bigger impact than we realized." "It always does when you're fighting for something bigger than yourself," Zara agreed. "Every generation has to choose whether to accept the world as it currently exists or fight courageously for the world as it should be." As they descended into the subway system, joining the incredibly diverse crowd of New Yorkers heading home after another day of work and dreams, they carried with them the unshakable knowledge that individual courage, when combined with institutional accountability and systematic change, could create transformation that lasted far beyond any single story or personal victory. The twins had begun their journey as passengers denied boarding due to racial discrimination. They were ending it as recognized leaders who had helped construct a more just and equitable society. One policy change, one training program, one transformed heart and mind at a time. Their father had been absolutely right about transformation requiring fire and struggle, but they had learned something even more important and powerful. When you refuse to be consumed or defeated by that fire, when you stand firm in your dignity and fight strategically for justice, you can use that very fire to forge something stronger, more beautiful, and more equitable than what existed before their courage changed everything. The phone call that had grounded an entire airline had ultimately elevated an entire industry to higher standards. The discrimination that was intended to diminish and silence them had instead amplified their voices and their message. Across the world, the system that had tried systematically to exclude and marginalize them had been fundamentally transformed to protect and empower future generations. And in conference rooms and training centers across America and around the world, in airports and boardrooms and carouses, people were still learning and implementing the powerful lesson that Zara and Yolanda Whitmore had taught through their courage. That human dignity is never negotiable, that justice is never optional, and that meaningful change is always possible when people have the moral courage to demand both equality and accountability. The transformation of Skyline Executive Aviation was complete, but the broader work of creating a just society continued with renewed energy and hope. Because in a world where discrimination still existed in countless forms and institutions, there would always be more systems to challenge, more barriers to overcome, more victories to achieve, and more young people to inspire with the knowledge that their voices mattered and their courage could change the world. And somewhere at Miami Executive Airport, at the very gate where two teenagers had once been denied boarding because of the color of their skin, passengers of all backgrounds were now boarding their flights with the dignity, respect, and equal treatment that every human being deserved. The living, breathing legacy of two young women who had refused to accept anything less than justice and had transformed an entire industry in the process. The Skyline executive jets that had once been symbols of exclusion and discrimination had become symbols of inclusion, equality, and the transformative power of moral courage. Every flight that departed carried not just passengers to their destinations, but the promise that the arc of justice, when pulled by determined hands and courageous hearts, truly does bend toward equality and human dignity for all. Thank you to everyone who typed respect and to all who shared their locations from around the world. Your global support means everything. If these stories inspire you, please subscribe to join our community and help us share more incredible tales of courage and justice. Until next time, keep believing in the power of truth.